Hi all, Dr. Clark here again. For natural resources, today we're going to talk about sustainable energy. And I'm just going to give kind of an overview of things that we can do to make energy, even if it's non-renewable, more sustainable. Okay? And so this is part of what is often called the green movement or the environmental movement. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about kind of stem from research that is done um, by individuals that are part of that movement or individuals that are taking advantage of that movement. Okay? So sustainable energy doesn't always have to be renewable energy. Okay? It's just energy that um, is more sustainable and longer lasting than our current energy sources. Fossil fuel, for that example. So let's dive in and look at some of the ways in which we can even make fossil fuel a little more sustainable. Alright, so the first part of sustainability really goes around reducing consumption. Okay? And this takes us all the way back to the beginning of the semester when I had you, the very first thing that you had to do was create your or calculate your ecological footprint. Well, the reason why I have students do that is I'm trying to get you to think about, regardless of your feeling on fossil fuels or renewable resources or global climate change or anything along those lines. Maybe it's a political view, religious view, a family view. I don't really care. Um, but the purpose of having you calculate your ecological footprint is for you to realize how much resources you use. Okay? And regardless of fossil fuels or not, we can all benefit from reducing our rate of consumption. And you can do that by doing quite a few things. Okay? For example, we can increase efficiency of whatever we're consuming. And recent advances with technology have done so, like fluorescent light bulbs. Right? They produce more light, which you know is a good thing for most individuals. They want a little more light from their light bulb, so 4 times as much light for the same wattage, and they last about 10 times longer. Okay? Then you can take into account like LED bulbs. Okay? They're even more efficient than fluorescent light bulbs. They consume about 90% less energy. On top of it, LED bulbs don't create the heat that other light bulbs do. So they tend to have a much higher safety rating. So you can use them as Christmas tree lights, and you can use them, in areas where you have light that's surrounded by, you know, flammable material and things like that because they just don't heat like the other bulbs do. And they're highly efficient, and often they last a very long time. Okay. Probably one of the easiest things that is still suggested by most environmental movements is to decrease the phantom energy um, that we consume. I mean, everyone's guilty of this at times, and that is you're burning energy when you don't need to. Okay? Either you're burning energy in your house when you don't need to, you're burning energy in your vehicle when you don't need to, but you're burning energy. And for the most part, under today's consumption, that energy is non-renewable. So when you sit and let your vehicle idle for 20, 30, 40 minutes, okay, you're burning fossil fuels that are not renewable. right? And that's, what we call this phantom energy, this energy that is really, it's easy to control. You can just turn off the engine, appliance, whatever it might be, that is, you know, burning energy. Okay, so TVs, printers, computers, these kind of things. You can save a lot of energy, but you can also save a lot of money. The appliances in what we call standby mode represents roughly 25% of your electric bill. So just having, the TV that's geared up, or the satellite dish, cable box, whatever it is, your computer, your iPad, your cell phone, your microwave, whatever it might be, just sitting there burning energy when it's not needed, is about 25% of your electrical bill. Okay? And there's simple things like just putting your computer to sleep, setting the sleep settings on your computer so you can save a large amount of energy by doing things like this. Okay. So some of the standby energy consumption that we see, things like telephone, wireless internet, okay, cable boxes, audio devices, like surround sound, things like that. VCRs and DVD players. Okay, these are probably VCRs. Some of the students that might be watching this don't even know what a VCR is. But DVD players, Blu-ray players, video game machines, these kind of things can be a pretty big piece. TV, and then the major piece is your office, your home office, if you have one. Your computer is the big one. Not having your computer in sleep mode, or leaving your printer on constantly, these kind of things burn a massive amount of energy. Now there's a lot of other ways in which we can cut energy costs, and so the development of new energy sources, or new like technology, is really not needed. If we can cut down how much we burn, how much energy we expend in a year, then maybe fossil fuels and things like that will last longer. Right? So we don't have to rush the technology to, move away from fossil fuels. Ways at which we can do that is by building better buildings. I mean, I don't know how many of you have had a house built recently, but that construction is, I don't want to say it's the cheapest possible material, but often it's cheap material. Insulation is not very good. Um, Rarely do they have double window panes, these kind of things. So in the end, you have a building that is not very efficient. There are countries that have changed their um, building regulations, to build buildings that are energy efficient. Okay? Say Sweden, right? And they are 90% less, they use 90% less energy than a typical house in the United States. They're super insulated houses, right? And Sweden is on that forefront of being 100% renewable resources. Currently, I believe they're 99% renewable resources. And one way that they can do that is cut massive amounts of energy out of, running a conventional house. Okay? So there's lots of ways at which this can occur, in which you can do this. You can, have different types of insulation in the roofing. You can use photovoltaic, uh, like water heaters, okay, where the sun is heating the water for your water tank, things like that. So you're not burning fossil fuels to heat water. You can build a house keeping in mind which way north and south is. And this was used to be done a lot. So if you buy an older house, often they would situate the windows of the house towards the south, okay? Especially if you're in a cold environment, so that in the middle of winter you would get as much heat through those windows as possible. Okay? And then the northern part of the house, the northern side of the house, will probably have very few windows because it gets very little energy, and thus you don't want a lot of energy escaping. So south side would have lots of windows, and then a good landscaper would plant trees that are deciduous trees, so they would have leaves in the summer, and they would shade out those windows during the summer so it would keep the house cool. And then in the winter, the leaves all fall and the sunlight is allowed to go in. It's hardly done anymore in the United States. Most people don't think about situating your house in a certain situation or a certain angle to take advantage of the sun and the solar energy that's coming off of it, because we have a large amount of fossil fuels. So if you want to heat your house, you just turn the furnace up. If you want to cool your house, you just turn the air conditioning on. But a lot of other countries have moved away from that and are starting to build smarter construction to take advantage of the changing environments and this solar energy that's coming in. And we'll talk a lot more about solar in a little bit. One of the big ones is transportation. Transportation is highly inefficient currently, especially in the United States. But in lots of other countries, they're just as bad as the United States with efficiency. And clearly, we could be a lot more efficient. So right now, if you look at things like the conventional typical automobile and small trucks, it's about 40% of the United States oil consumption. Okay? And that's, amounts to about 1/5 of the carbon dioxide emitted to the atmosphere. Okay? Just from normal everyday commuter cars and trucks and things like that, just general people, driving. Now, if we just took and increased the average fuel efficiency by, say, 3 miles per gallon, okay, you can conserve or save roughly $25 million a year, or $1 billion a year. Think about that. The country itself is trillions of dollars in debt. All we would have to do is say, hey, auto companies, you just have to increase the efficiency of your engines by 3 miles per gallon, and we can save billions of dollars a year. Okay? Not only would you save that, we'd also save more oil, and we could stop drilling or stop talking about drilling on our national parks and our wildlife refuges and things like that. And the reason why we know this to be true is because it's happened before. In the 1970s, we had a oil deficiency, okay, in the United States. And there are lots, if those individuals who have parents that grew up in the 70s, or maybe you yourself were in the grew up in the 70s, or have brothers and sisters that did, or family members that did, and you can ask them. There are many gas stations all over the United States that they would have a limit on how much fuel you could have. Okay? They would limit how many gallons of gas you could take, and the lines would be ridiculous, and a lot of gas stations, midweek they'd be out of gas. Okay? And that's partly because the oil prices were ridiculous. But when that happened, okay, we doubled our fuel efficiency rating, and we got to an average fuel efficiency rating of almost 26 miles per gallon in 1988. Okay? But by the time we got to 2004, we were back down to 20.7 miles per gallon. we dropped almost 5 miles per gallon, okay, in 12 years or so, okay? A little over 12 years, 16 years. Okay? We shouldn't be going backwards. We should be going forwards, okay? To save money, save oil, and save the refuges. Okay? At least most people think we should. So, transportation could be a lot more efficient. Okay? With the modern technology coming out, there is a huge push to potentially buy electrical cars or at least hybrid gasoline cars. Um, Lots of countries, including the United States, are pushing greener technologies like walking to work, bicycling to work, you know, huge things like taking transit to work, so buses, things like that. So much that even there's initiatives and incentives in some places where, your employer will give you a, you know, a bus pass for a year, right, if you just ride the bus versus, taking your own car to work. And not only will that benefits the employee, right, the employer then doesn't have to have a bunch of, parking spaces. It doesn't have, they don't have to associate you with being stuck in traffic or anything like that, because you're taking transit. You're going to take the train or the bus, and they know when you're going to be to work, and that will be on time. And so there are lots of ways at which this can happen, and it could be both beneficial to the employer and to the environment. There are citywide movements to, for bicycles and things like this. If you've been to places like Seattle or Portland, um, Salt Lake, there are like many cities that will have these places where you can rent a bike, and in some cases they're completely free, um, and you just have to return it, and you just ride it around town instead of driving your car, things like that. Now, one thing that we can talk about and should talk about, and we've talked about before under the discussion boards, is the hybrid car, the electric car situation. Um, and we've talked about it a little bit by looking at things that Tesla's doing, but we'll also talk about it and look at it with things like hydrogen cars and things like that as we progress. But there is definitely a movement in the United States for sure, but worldwide there's a movement to provide a lot more plug-in hybrid cars. Okay? And one way in which this can benefit uh, the electrical grid is that you're plugging in your vehicle normally at night. Okay? And this is when there's often a surplus of energy in the electrical grid because most people are asleep, so their heavy appliances, TVs, things like that, are not running at night. Okay? So instead, you're charging your car. Well, you're charging your car off peak hours, okay? And that can make a very efficient use of electricity. In fact, right now, the cost of electricity is about 50 cents per gallon. And I think most people right now would say, hey, I'll take that. I think most people are paying $2.80, $3, $3.30, depending on what part of the country you're in, per gallon, and most people take the 50 cents. Okay? Problem with this is right now the current infrastructure in the United States will not support the millions of cars that we would need to go onto an electrical grid. We have to update this system. Okay? And there are companies like Tesla that are starting to update the system, like Chevy that is starting to update the system. But more than that, we probably need to approach this from a government point of view and update the entire electrical grid across the United States. Um, my opinion. You could also not go electric and go diesel. And Honda right now has a diesel car that'll get 62, 63 miles per gallon. Okay? I'd say, that Volkswagen was getting in those ranges also, but maybe that was some smoke and mirrors. But there are also a big push now for diesel plug-in models, okay, where you're buying a hybrid car that's not purely electric, but runs on diesel and you can plug it in. And if we did that, if all the cars were diesel plug-in or plug-in hybrid pure electric cars, we could shift the United States completely off of imported oil. Okay? And there's a lot of benefits to not importing oil. First of all, we're not subjected to other people's regulations when it comes to oil and tariffs and things like that on supplies and stuff. Now there are lots of other development, and I said, some of this will be based on technology and where we're going with the technology. There are hydrogen fuel cars being developed currently, and there are some on the market. Toyota has one, Nissan has one, I think Hyundai has one. Okay? And these are hydrogen fuel celled cars. Um, so what's the benefits? The waste product is water. Okay? It will take probably another 20 years for these models to start flooding the market because the infrastructure is far worse than the electrical infrastructure. The fact is you would have to fill up at a hydrogen fuel center, okay? Just like you have to fill up at a petroleum fuel based center. If you're driving a hydrogen car, you have to have hydrogen gas. We don't have very many infrastructures like this. There are some in other countries, and there are a couple spots in the United States, but by and large, it's just not there. So you'd have to upgrade the entire infrastructure of the United States for hydrogen gas fuel to come in. Um, the benefits is huge. You can drive further on hydrogen gas cars than you can electric cars under the current technology. They're lighter weight. The waste product is water. Yeah, overall, it's better. The charging period there is no charge for hydrogen gas. You just fill it up. Okay, so where you might be looking at an electrical car where you're charging for 3-4 hours for full charge, a hydrogen gas car, you're in and out in 5 minutes. So the benefits are big, but it's going to take a lot of time before the market's there. But there are a lot of governments that are spending lots of money on this situation, and the United States is starting projects on developing not necessarily cars, but more importantly, things like airplanes. So running airplanes on hydrogen gas, hydrogen fuel cells, it has become, kind of a in recent times, kind of a big deal. Now I know some of you will be like, well, didn't that not pan out very well when the blimp was full of hydrogen and ignited? Yes, hydrogen is flammable, but there are ways at which you can use pressurized tanks to prevent any explosions, um, and they're far more safe than, say, petroleum-based gas, whether that be diesel or gasoline. So the safety's there. That's not a big deal. What's not there is the infrastructure to start this process. Yeah. Other ways at which we could do more with what we have is by combining electricity and heat. So the cogeneration processes that we used to do in this country would be to develop electricity, but at the same time develop heat. Okay, so one plant would be developing electricity and hot water. Okay? And the benefits would be that, you're changing your energy yield from 30 to 35% to 80 to 90%. Okay? And this is starting to come back into favor um, after it went away. I mean, in the early 1900s, about half the electrical generation in the United States came with steam and heating. So you would have electricity being created, and then you could provide heat to, buildings and things like that at the exact same time. Um, by the 70s, it was about 5%. Okay, but this is starting to come back into favor, and it's being rejuvenated in many regions, in really cold climates mainly. But I've seen a couple new apartment complexes that have been constructed that are starting to take advantage of this. There are colleges that are taking advantage of this, where they're burning waste, or burning municipal waste products, things like that, and creating heat and electricity at the same time. Um, so there's lots of situations where a little bit of advances in technology, maybe we're taking old technology we used to have and used to do quite often, whether that be, cogeneration of electricity and heat, or whether that be, you know, just systems that we used to utilize, and we're revitalizing them. We're bringing them up, 21st century look at things and new modern technology, and I think we're going to make advances with some of the things like burning our waste versus burying our waste. It's, could be a huge advantage in the near future. Okay, with that, we're now going to shift to one specific natural or renewable resource, and that will be solar. So I'll spend some time with solar, and then I'll switch and talk about wind, and then I'll probably switch and talk about hydro, and then maybe a little bit of geothermal and the others that um, exist on the side. Okay? All right, with that, solar's next.